folks who couldn't make it today. And I want to respect the time of those of you who've given up your afternoon to be here with Roger Chao. Roger has been on the board of Oakland Literacy Council for 3 or 4 years, I think, Roger.
Yeah, it's about coming up 4 years now.
And he came to us because he is assistant professor of writing and rhetoric at Oakland University. And he's done a lot of work with the interaction between helping people who are out there in the workforce, adult learners, improve their writing skills. And he's done some work on the side for some clients of Oakland Literacy along those lines, helping to develop programs with us. And he also has a really unique perspective because his mother was also an English language learner. So he knows the struggle that a lot of our students are facing every day. So I've asked him to talk about grammar because I know from comments that I've received that Burlington English, the grammar leaves some of us scratching our heads and needing some more background than what we can find on that software. And it's often something that a lot of us learned like way back in 5th grade. And when our students ask us a question, sometimes we just don't know the rules and all the terms because we use it every day, but we don't use those terms. So I'm going to turn it over to Roger to get started. And I'm sure he'll take your questions as we go along or at the end.
Yeah.
Roger.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lori, for that great introduction. So a couple of things just wanted to cover before we start is first, so I think we're recording now, Lori, right?
Yes.
We're going, cool. So first thing, everyone can see the PowerPoint right now. Is everyone seeing it?
Yeah.
Let me get a thumbs up, right? Awesome. And, you know, I feel like when we're on mute, a good indicator of if I ask a question, just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, and that'll be I'll be making sure I'll see everyone and just let me know if anything comes up. Another thing is we'll be doing some interactive activities in this workshop, which will be using the chat feature. Just be, feel free to type your responses in the chat, even if, we're kind of going past the activity a little bit. I'm not the fastest typer, so don't worry. Like if we go past an activity and you're still typing, just hit send and I'll read it out loud as well. Okay. But just building on some of the things that Lori was saying. So today we're going to go over this grammar workshop. I want to cover some grammar, but here's the thing about grammar that I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with, which is it's a really hard thing to teach and it's a really hard thing to remember. And I think that I don't want to set us up for failure to tell you that, oh, by the end of this 1-hour workshop, you guys are going to be able to answer every single grammar question your students have, which is just not possible because I've been teaching writing for almost a decade now, and there are a ton of grammar rules that I just need to constantly remind myself of. So we'll cover some basic sort of things about grammar rules, but what I really want to cover today with you is some general strategies that you can apply to any sort of grammar situation or just grammar activities that you can work on with your students. Because I like to think of this almost as a toolbox, right? Like I'm providing you with just some strategies that you can then mold and fit into whatever situation that you might need it, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and click on the next slide. So right now, did everyone see me jump to the next slide? Give me a thumbs up. No? Oh, okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing this. Give me 1 second here. I had a feeling that there was, here we go. How about now? Yeah, seeing some thumbs up. Great. All right. So I want to cover the workshop agenda real quick. So first thing I want to do is we'll just do an icebreaker, get us warmed up a little bit. Something I like to start every one of my classes with is just a little icebreaker to get us familiar with one another. The second thing I want to do is I want to review the 8 parts of speech. So this is one of those things that I'm sure, a lot of us are familiar with, but I think it's a good thing to review because it's good to remember what the parts of speech are. And by doing so, we arm ourselves with some vocabulary, right? And we have specific terms that we can use to describe things. And if we pass that information along to our students, it makes it easier for them to describe what kind of errors they're having, or it makes it easier for us to identify problems. So I want to review what those 8 parts of speech are, just as a refresher. Now, if we have time, I want to cover the common grammar mistakes made by ELL students. So I went and did some research before this workshop, and I just looked into what are the most common grammar errors that students who are learning English often face. And there are three of them, and I'll break those down and talk about how to address those grammar mistakes. But the main thing I really want to get to today are these strategies for helping our students with grammar. And the strategies I want to talk about is the types of written feedback that we give our students to help them with their grammar, and also the oral feedback that we can give to help them with their grammar. So I want to cover those. All right, but first, let's do a little bit of an icebreaker, okay? So I want you to type your responses into the chat. You can type as much or as little as you want. You can type full sentences, bullet points, whatever you are comfortable with. Okay, and so the first thing is tell us your name, okay, how long you've been a tutor at the Oakland Literacy Council, and what made you want to be a tutor in the first place, okay? And so I'll take a moment and I'll just sort of talk about myself as you guys type, okay? So feel free to sort of type your responses in this chat as I'm talking. So as I stated, my name is Roger Chao. Echoing some of the things that Lori said in her introduction, I've been here for almost 4 years now. And even though I'm not a tutor, I've always had this real interest in just adult literacy and teaching ESL and ELL. I've told this story the first time I did the grammar workshop. I think I've told this story maybe 3 or 4 times now, Lori, but I'm going to do it again. You know, my parents immigrated to this country from China, and you know, my dad has goldfish memory. Like you'll tell him one thing and it'll just go right through his brain and out the other side. But one thing that he remembers to this day is the name of his tutor when he first came to the US, and he went through a very similar program like the Oakland Literacy Council. And to this day, he still remembers the name of his tutor, which is this woman named Lucy. And so that just showed me the impact that the work that you all are doing. You know, the fact that it might not seem that much, you know, whether it's maybe infrequent tutoring sessions or maybe, you know, sometimes you just don't make that much progress. I can assure you that your students really appreciate the work that you do. And so that's something that drew me to a program like the Oakland Literacy Council. And so I want to take a second and just look at the chat and some of the responses. So I'll read them out loud a little bit. All right. So let me scroll to the top here. So we have Leslie. Welcome, Leslie, right? Leslie's been a tutor fairly recently, just February, and she wants to help local Michigan residents with their level of literacy. Great, awesome. Thank you, Leslie. Scroll down a little bit. Don, thank you for joining us today, right? Don's been a tutor for 3 years or so and taught ESL as a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea. Very cool, very, very cool. Let's look at one more. Miriam, welcome, Miriam. Right, Miriam has been with the Oakland Literacy Council for 15 years now, and she believes reading is important. Yeah, you know, literacy is such a powerful tool, not just in terms of communication, but just in terms of like being able to interact with friends, family, with our community. So I agree. Let's look at one more here. Zenobia, welcome, Zenobia. Zenobia has been tutoring for a couple of years now. She loves reading and wants everyone to read and enjoy books and good literature. So it seems like reading is a big hobby for a lot of people here, and that's something I think is very crucial, and writing as well, right? So something I really want to hit as we are doing this workshop is the importance of writing when we are teaching grammar. I know a lot of us are comfortable, and it's often easier to teach our tutors through just sort of oral communication or oral activities. But one thing I'm going to stress in this workshop is the importance and the value of writing when it comes to helping students with their grammar. All right, thank you. So let's do a little bit of a review on the 8 parts of speech. Okay, and so the 8 parts of speech is something that I tell my students. Something you might want to think about telling your students as well, if they don't know what the 8 parts of speech are, is to think of them as the building blocks of the English language. So one technique that you might already do when you tutor, and one technique I really like when I tutor or when I teach, is I like to draw analogies and metaphors. And I think this is really helpful across linguistic barriers, right? Is that if you can draw an analogy, it helps, it can often help your student understand the concept. All right, so I often explain the 8 parts of speech as the building blocks of the English language. Okay, and so for example, when we want to build a house, Right? We use concrete to make the foundation. We use bricks to make the walls. We use window frames to make windows and shingles to form the roof. And so each part of the house has its own function and has its own purpose. And so similarly, we combine these different parts of speech together to build a sentence. So like bricks, like window frames, like shingles, each part of speech has its own function. So I really like this analogy because it's something that I think is very easily able to be grasped by someone who's learning English or a novice to English. Okay, so one thing I want to cover is that while there is debate over the actual number, like how many parts of speech are there actually, most grammar sources traditionally categorize English into 8 parts of speech. And as a tutor, it's just good to know to refresh what the parts of speech are. I want to see and I want to encourage you to work them and their definition frequently into conversations with your student. That way they will be able to name them and ask questions about them quickly. Because if you think about it, if your students can understand what the parts of speech are, if they can name them, then it's easier for them to describe to you what they might be having issues are, right? If they don't know what the names, if they don't know what the parts of speech are, if they don't know what they're called, if they don't know their definition, it's much harder for them to tell you or to maybe describe to you what they're having issues with. And so this is meant to help this activity that we're about to do in this section we're about to look at in this workshop. It's meant to encourage you to get you and your student to talk about and use the 8 parts of speech a little bit more. All right, everybody's favorite time. Let's do a little pop quiz. How about this? So I'm going to put 30 seconds on the clock, all right? I'm going to hold up my phone right up to my camera so you can count down. All right, in the chat window, don't start yet. I want to see how many parts of speech you can name in 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to start the clock right now in 30 seconds and just start typing away into the chat. All right, so we're naming parts of speech. If you can name 1, awesome. If you can name 2, even better. If you can hit all 8, even better. Whoop. All right, so that's 30 seconds. Awesome, yes. So I see Teresa with some great answers, right? Noun, verb, pronouns, excellent. We see noun coming up a lot, verbs, adverbs, good, right? Adjective, good, good. So we have, good. So I think we are on the same page. We're aware of what, at least the concept I'm talking about. So in case you can't name all 8 of them, that's totally fine. Let's do a little refresher and go over the definitions a little bit. All right, so first thing, everyone's favorite part of speech, see it come up a lot, it is the noun, right? Noun is a word to describe or to refer to people, animals, objects, substances, states, events, ideas, and feelings. Now, the definition I pulled up here is really funny because I remember when I was in elementary school, noun was just taught to me as people, places, and things. But as you can see, we've gotten a little bit more specific in how we are describing nouns. But for the most part, nouns are how we remember them, right? People, I think if you want a general idea, if you want to simplify it for your student, you can go with the traditional form of people, places, and things, right? And a noun can be modified or, in other words, described by an adjective. So example, like a greenhouse or a big dog. Okay, so that's an easy one. I think we all know about nouns, right? There we have the adjective, right? Adjectives that I just covered in the last slide. It's used to modify or describe a noun or pronoun. So something like a beautiful home, right? A nice man, okay? A tall chair, okay? So these are adjectives. Okay. All right, pronoun, okay? Pronoun is used in the place of a noun, okay? So example, I, you, he, she, it, pretty simple. Okay. 8 parts of speech. Let's move on to adverb. Okay, adverb is an adverb is used to modify a verb, adjective, and other adverbs. Often ends in ly. And before I move any further, if I'm going too fast, if you want me to stick on a slide, please type in the chat. I'm just trying to sort of be aware of the time and the content I have. But if I'm going too fast, please let me know, okay? Also, since this is a review, I figure we can maybe move at this a little faster for pace. But anyway, So an adverb is used to modify a verb, adjective, and other adverbs, or it often ends in ly. And so this is my favorite way of defining or describing an adverb to students. As I say, use an adverb when you're trying to give more detail to a verb or adjective. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, so when you want to describe a door, right? Not just that it's painted, but you want to say that it's a poorly painted door, okay? Or something that is a held belief, but you want to emphasize that it is a widely held belief. So that's how I typically categorize adverbs for students, is that when you're looking for that word that just gives your noun a little bit of an extra description, a little bit of an extra detail, that's where you put an adverb in place, okay? And Teresa says, please explain how it is modified. So Teresa, I'm going to ask you to add a little bit more details to your request, just so I know what you mean. And I'll try to answer your question, okay? So the 8 parts of speech, preposition. Okay, so prepositions express the relationship between 2 words in a sentence, specifically between a noun, verb, or adjective, and a noun or pronoun. Okay, so there's a wide list of adjectives. If you do go on the internet and you do a search for prepositions, they'll come up. But for example, something like in, above, to, for, at. So these words describe the relationship between 2 subjects or 2 objects. So here's a claim that you may have heard, something you may have been taught. I know I was certainly taught about it. But the old claim that it's wrong to end a sentence with a preposition is not as rigid as it once was. Okay, so I don't know if you've heard this, but I remember hearing this when I was coming up through school. It's like, you can't end a sentence with a preposition. Okay, but here's the thing: it's while it might be a formal grammatical rule, it is not something that really has made its way into our sort of modern vernacular, because writers who always insist that a preposition cannot end a sentence often end up with a stilted and unnatural sentence. So at the cost of following grammar rules for prepositions, sometimes there's this risk of losing the actual cohesiveness and the meaning of the statement. Okay, so for example, this statement, right? There's no one else to hide behind. Now, grammatically, following that old preposition rule, this is considered incorrect, but linguistically, the way we talk about it, it is grammatically correct and natural, right? So if we were to follow the old rule, there's no one else behind whom to hide. While this might be grammatically correct, it feels very unnatural. Okay, so where did you come from? And sorry, these 2 things that should say grammatically incorrect, right? But it sounds natural. But the phrase "from where did you come from?" again, it follows the correct grammar rules, but it doesn't quite sound the most natural way of speaking. And so that's just something to keep in mind, is that in sort of common and in modern I guess grammar rules, the rules about prepositions aren't as followed as rigidly as it once was. All right. Another part of the parts of speech is conjunction, right? We might have all remembered that Schoolhouse Rock song, Conjunction, Junction. Okay, this is the exact same concept right here. So conjunctions connect words, phrases, or clauses. Okay, acronym to remember it is fanboys, for and nor, but, or, yet, so. So that's a good acronym to teach your students to remember the conjunctions in the English language, right? So for example, Tiffany and Beverly talked all night long. Okay. So this conjunction connects 2 nouns, right? So it joins Tiffany and Beverly together. Conjunctions can also be used to join independent clauses, right? So clauses, think of them as statements. Students want to learn and teachers want to teach. So the explanation here is this conjunction connects 2 independent clauses. Students want to learn, which is something we call independent clause because it can stand on its own linguistically. Teachers want to teach is a statement that can stand on its own linguistically, and we use a conjunction to bring them together. Okay. Now we have interjection. Now, interjection was something that it was when I was reviewing and building this workshop, it's something that I totally forgot about, but it is considered a part of speech, right? So interjections are used to show surprise or emotion. So, oh, wow, aha. Wow, she aced the test. He yelled in surprise, oh, I get it. So interjections, I often describe it as it adds emotion, right? It adds a tone, it adds an intonation to your written English. Okay, and finally, the verb, right? And I say verb for the end because verb out of the 8 parts of speech, in my opinion, it's the most nuanced, it's the most complex. It's the one that a lot of ELL learners struggle with. So the basic sort of description of a verb, as we all know, is to show an action or a state of being, right? So action being something like jump, ride, travel. State of being is the to be, right? Be is am, are, was, were, been, or being. But verbs or participles can also function as nouns. And in these situations, they actually have this whole new term, and they're called gerunds or gerunds. Okay, so let me show you an example of what a gerund is, right? So a gerund is basically a way to think about it is when a verb is not describing an action, but in the statement, it's actually functioning as a noun. Okay, so here's an example. Valerie hates cooking because she always forgets the recipe halfway through. Okay, so in this specific example of the statement, cooking is what we typically think of as a verb, right? It's an action that we do. In this statement, it actually functions as a thing. It functions as the thing that is the object of the verb hates, right? So it's the object that Valerie, the subject, hates on, right? So gerunds, I think, there's so many details about how verbs can be modified that we can do an entire workshop and a very headachy workshop to just cover all the nuances. But what I want to just really cover about verbs is that all this just to say, and perhaps for you to tell your students, is that verbs have a complex role in the English language. Okay, your students may not need to know terms like gerund, right? They don't have to know it specifically, but they should know that sometimes verbs are not only used to describe an action. Okay, so they can function in a lot of different ways. And so I really encourage you to just do maybe a little bit of personal research on how verbs can be modified, how they function as nouns and gerunds and things like that. Okay. So we're about the halfway mark of this workshop. So what I want to do is I want to actually skip over the common mistakes for ELL students, because like I mentioned earlier, I only wanted to cover 3, and you might have scenarios that don't fit these 3 mistakes that I described. And so I don't want it to be a waste of your time. So what I want to do is I want to jump ahead to cover some basic grammar strategies that that I think you can apply to any sort of grammar situation that you encounter with you and your student. Okay. Just give me one moment here. We are going to jump. And if we have time, I'll come back around and I'll circle back around. But let's jump to slide 26. Okay. So strategies for teaching grammar rules. And the way we'll think about this is I want to cover some general ones, but I also want to cover some specific ways of giving written feedback when it comes to grammar, and as well as oral feedback for giving grammar. Okay, so one of the most important rules to think about and to keep in mind is that you want to avoid teaching and helping your students with their grammar. You want to avoid teaching it out of context or through repetitive drilling. And I know this is something that feels very common because when we were coming up, when all of us were coming up through school, how many of us remember those worksheets where it was just like 20 sentences with a blank and you had to fill in a word or you had to modify a verb and you did a bunch of, right? I can't tell you how many I've done, okay? Situations like that or activities like that, while they might be a good way of introducing a grammar rule or a concept to your student, it's not something you want to stick with the entirety, right? You want to teach grammar in the context of how they're used, right? And you want to teach it a lot just through practice and getting your student familiar with the English language. Okay, so grammar taught in isolation outside the context of meaningful writing has been found to have no significant impact on the quality of student writing. And in fact, excessive drills can have a detrimental impact on it. Okay, so let me, and I want to cover a little bit about gerund. So So Lynn says, I thought Garen was pronounced Jaren. I think you might be right. You might be right, Lynn. So let's take a look at Lynn's revision in the chat here. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. So I want to talk a little bit about the context. How do we teach grammar? How do we give a little bit more context to the grammar that we are teaching? Okay, so one thing we want to do is we want to give our students plenty of time to read and write, right? Learning grammar, if we're not going to teach it through repetitive drilling, if we're not going to teach it through just out of context worksheets, we need to give our students a chance to really practice reading them and writing them within a larger work, right? So regular exposure to lots and lots of good writing will naturally improve the correctness of students' writing. More importantly, have your students read content that is relevant to their life, right? So one of the things that I really encourage is I want your students to practice reading something that is relevant to them, right? Whether it's something like a current event, a local news article, because research has also shown just from writing studies is that when people have an emotional attachment to whatever they are reading or writing, it helps them process and understand the information a little bit better. Okay, so if it's just to reemphasize something maybe that's happening currently in the news, something that's happening in their life, if they have an emotional bond to it, it helps them understand the concepts and the grammar rules around it a little bit better. And in terms of writing means both formal pieces that are taken all the way through the writing process, right? So from outlining to revision, but it can also be very informal writing. And depending on where your student's skill level is, sometimes those informal pieces of writing is what is the most important to get them comfortable with grammar, right? So don't, ask them to, write anything too long, like a paragraph. Maybe if they can even knock out 1 to 2 sentences and follow proper grammatical rules, I think that's a victory in and of itself. And just and another sort of anecdote just to share, when my mom was going through her, she had a tutor and she was going through ESL and things like that. This program wasn't the best funded organization, and so they didn't have a lot of resources like textbooks. And things like that. And so one thing that her tutor and her would often do is they would just grab a newspaper from the local library, and then they would just read the newspaper together, right? And they would just, starting with something basic like headlines and working through some of the finer details. So you don't need anything too complex to teach writing and reading in context. Something as basic as a newspaper work. And so I think what I just said kind of transitions well into what Phyllis was asking here is, do these methods apply to ESL learners equally? I think ultimately that depends, right? I think the concept of encouraging your student to read and write is something that is universally applicable. Now, it just depends on how much they can handle, how much writing can they go through, how complex of text can they read. But generally, these strategies are applicable universally across a variety of literacy levels. All right. When I was building this workshop and coming up with some of the tips and strategies, one of the things that I liked that I came across was this idea of getting your student to repeat the corrected phrase or sentence after you've corrected them, right? So this sort of back-to-back repetition, I think, is really helpful. So after you've corrected a student on their grammar, have students repeat the phrase or sentence, okay? Make a point of actually asking the student to say something rather than just listen to you. And I know this, for a lot of tutors, especially for tutors who are starting out, sometimes it feels a little bit like you're hand holding a little bit too much, or you're babying your student, but this kind of repetition helps a lot. So the idea is that this gives students enough time to get their tongues around the statement or the phrase. Okay, so after you correct them, make sure your student gets a chance to say the corrected phrase or get a chance to say the correct sentence. And so here's an example, right? So can you all repeat this after me? I guess in our situation, because it's one-on-one, you wouldn't refer to them as all, but you would say, so can you repeat after me? Did you eat yet? Good, now say it 2 more times on your own. Okay, so just little simple prompts like that gets your student more and more comfortable with, and more familiar, I should say, with just how it sounds when grammar is used correctly. All right. Another technique I want to share. it's something called the finger or the hand technique. And so if your student makes a mistake, if they make a grammatical mistake, you can use your hands and your fingers to break down long sentences into individual words, right? So when a student is struggling with a language and they're struggling and they make a mistake in a long sentence, it can feel daunting to identify, what that mistake is or what the mistakes are. And so if you use this hand and finger technique, which I'm going to show you in a moment, it helps your student digest and it helps them process the sentence slower and gives them a chance to autocorrect, right? So I want to give you an example, right? So let's say you have a student and they say, this morning, I eat eggs for breakfast. This morning, I eat eggs for breakfast. Now, instead of just saying to your student, no, you should say, this morning, I ate eggs for breakfast. If you follow the hand and the finger technique, you say, okay, let's break that sentence down a little bit. And I want to see, let's break it down a little bit, right? So this morning, I eat eggs for breakfast. Right? And you can have them say it with you as you hold a hand up, right? So you hold a finger up. So they say this, then they should say morning, I, right? And so on and so on. Now, when they come to the part of the sentence that they are struggling on, that is where you gesture, right? You do something to let them know that this is where the mistake is, right? So this morning, I ate, right? I ate. And you can do something, you can gesture this way, right? Something in the past, right? Something in the future. Okay. So by combining your verbal cues with your gesture cues, you're really sort of helping your student get as close as possible to that mistake without you just telling them what it is, right? You want to guide them. Now, if they're struggling, if they just can't think of it, then you say, this morning I ate. Right? I ate. Ate is past tense, right? Morning happened earlier, so ate. Okay, so this is something I really like. And I think it's something that, as I said earlier, it takes something that's long and complex, which is what a sentence looks like to a English language learner, and it breaks it down into individual words. So try to give that finger technique a shot and try to build it as a like a repeated action in your actions, right? If you can do this repeatedly and they get more comfortable with it, I think it'll be a great benefit. Don says, we use what was called backward buildup. So I went downtown to go shopping, repeat go shopping. Yeah, that's another great technique, Don. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I want to cover now a couple of strategies for giving written feedback. So writing, it is something that I think is integral to learning a language. So my mom, who I mentioned is an immigrant, she has been in the US for 32 years now, and she's worked at a number of jobs. And so at this point, she still speaks with a pretty heavy accent, but she understands English enough and she can communicate English enough verbally with people to get through everything, to work, to go shopping, all that stuff. But she has the hardest time writing, right? You ask her to write a sentence and she just cannot do it, even though she can, you can ask her to go to the grocery store and buy any number of things she can pull it off. But if you ask her to write a grocery list, right, she starts to struggle. Okay. And so this is why I think it's so crucial to try to get your students to write a little bit if they don't write at all, or write a little bit more if they already do, if you guys already do some writing. Okay, and so I want to share some examples of how do we give written feedback to help with grammar. Okay, one thing that I love using is an error log. This is something that some of you might already use. But if you don't know what an error log is an ongoing document where students identify their grammar mistakes and how to correct them. Sorry, before I go on, Isabel has another great tip I want to turn your attention to in the chat. Isabel says, using a rubber band to illustrate the shape of vowels, such as a long A in the word cage, helps visually. I love that. I really love that tip, Isabel, because I think this goes back to this idea of combining our verbal feedback with gestures, right? Something that visually helps our students understand what we mean. So thanks for sharing that. So an error log, right? It's an ongoing document where students identify their grammar mistakes and how to correct them. When students receive feedback about a mistake in their writing, they create an entry in the log that includes the error and how to correct it. And the main benefit of this error log is it transforms grammar errors into a visible pattern, right? It makes something that is invisible into something that is visible, which you can then develop strategies and activities to address. So not only do you see it, your students also begin to see their error. And as a side note, there's this really famous book in the field of writing studies called Errors and Expectations by this professor named Mina Shaughnessy. And Mina Shaughnessy, the big argument she makes in this book, Errors and Expectations, is that when we as teachers, writing teachers or language teachers, when we stop thinking about our students' grammatical mistakes as just carelessness or forgetfulness, if we start thinking about them instead of those and more as patterns, as something that is built and that students can kind of revise and and unlearn, it becomes much more manageable and it becomes much more, we can develop strategies to address it. So that's one, I think, way of conceptualizing, I think, grammar rules. And something that an error log helps you do is it takes something that you might, that students might think of as, oh, this is, I'll never get this, I'll never be able to remember this rule. It transforms that into a pattern that they can then see and then start addressing. So really encourage using the error log. Teresa says, what strategies do you have for writing assignments? So strategies for writing assignments, especially for, I think for beginner writers, is one, just giving them very explicit prompts, right? And I can go into more details, but one thing I really like to do with students who are just beginning to write is I give them very explicit instructions, being like, I want this amount of sentences, or I want you to use a verb in each sentence, right? So from what I've learned from novice writers is the more specific instructions you can give them, the less guessing they have to do, right? Students, when they are writing a new language, they already have a billion different things processing their mind, things they want to say, errors they're worried about, et cetera, et cetera. If you can give them specific instructions on what you want, it helps guide them a little further. And I'll also touch on another strategy for correcting writing assignments in a second, Teresa. So here's an example of an error log, right? So here's a very basic one. We see the categories. For this one, it is the sentence with the error. So the student writes the sentence with the error in it. There's a description of what the error is. Now, what is the mistake they made, the corrected sentence, and then any notes and resources that are applicable. But one thing to keep in mind is that this error log, it's not like there's a formula or a set error log, right? But rather you can and should modify the categories in the error log based on your students' needs or skill level. Okay, so if we look at this sample one about the sample error log, your student might not know what a subject-verb agreement is yet. They might not have the literacy to understand what kind of error it is. So it's up to you to figure out what are the columns that would work in my student's error log and mold that to your specific context. So that's really the theme of today's workshop so far, right? Is that here are some general strategies, but ultimately it's up to you as tutors to mold them and make them fit into what your student needs. Okay, so this is something that maybe will help Teresa and other tutors who are looking to give more specific feedback in their students' writing. Is I like to circle student error in their writing and have them rewrite the corrected version. So real basic example, right? Let's say we come across a written sentence like this. Last month, I see a movie every Sunday. Now, instead of just pointing it out to students and being like, oh, you misspelled month, you wrong tense for C, there's no S in Sundays. What you can do is you just circle the errors first, right? You circle them after the students have written them, and then you pass it back to the student. So we're guiding them closer and closer to the error. And then we leave it up to the student first to see if they can write the corrected form, right? And so the idea is that this lets students know what they need to address. And then the student has to write the corrected one out, right? So again, this builds in that idea of repetition, right? Another theme of this workshop so far, right? We want to build in as much repetition as we can and practice for our students when it comes to grammar. So they write, you correct the miswritten sentence by circling things. You don't correct it for them right away. You pass it back to them. You let them rewrite it based on your circles. Or if they struggle with it, then you can go ahead and guide them to the correct answer. Okay. So the error log and this practice of circling student errors and having them correct it themselves are two strategies that work very well, I think, for helping students understand grammar rules through writing. All right. And so for our final activity today, this is going to take a little bit of participation, and I'm going to be shifting between windows and slides because I actually have a video for us to watch. Is I want to cover strategies for giving oral feedback. So I know a lot of us we're doing feedback where the feedback that we give is through oral communication. It's over Zoom or eventually in person. I want to share with you some strategies, some different styles for giving oral feedback, right? So there are various ways you can correct students on their speaking. Try to rotate these techniques throughout your tutoring session, okay? So in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 6 different oral feedback styles. All right, I have a video. They're broken up into 6 pieces. I'm going to just show one, and I'm going to pause one, show one, and pause one, et cetera, okay? After each example, what I want you to do is I want to see if you can describe or explain the feedback style you just saw, right? So in other words, you can type this into the chat. Describe how the tutor is correcting the student. Okay, so type your response into the chat window. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm gonna unshare this and I'm gonna share a new screen. Okay, great. All right, so everyone should now see my entire desktop, correct? Yes, thumbs up. Great, awesome. All right, and then, so what I want to do is I'm going to play us this first clip. All right, and I'll play it twice just to make sure we can cover it. All right, so as I said, I'm going to play this first clip. Watch the interaction and watch how the tutor gives the oral feedback, and type your description of how he is doing it in the chat, right? So you don't have to name the style just yet if you don't know what it is. So just try to describe what you see or what you hear. So audio should be kicking in a moment.
Hello everybody, welcome. So did you have a good weekend? How was your weekend, Erika?
Very good, teacher. I see a great movie.
Okay, but it's not see, it's I saw a great movie.
I saw a great movie.
Okay, let's watch that one more time.
Hello everybody, welcome. So did you have a good weekend? How was your weekend, Erika?
Very good, teacher. I see a great movie.
Okay, but it's not see, it's I saw a great movie.
I saw a great movie.
Okay, so if you didn't catch that, right? The student said, "I see a great movie," and the tutor said, "Oh, but it's not see, it's I saw a great movie." And then the student repeated. Okay, so in the chat window, right? Describe what you saw or heard. See if I can pull up the chat window here. Give me 1 second. Good, right? So Isabel, hand gesticulation, body language, Dave answer with no explanation, simple correction. Good. All right. Tense correction. Good. All right. So this style, let me make this a little bigger. So now you should be seeing the PowerPoint. Is that correct? Thumbs up. Yes, excellent. So this first style is called explicit feedback. And many of you who typed in the chat are correct, right? So after clearly indicating that the student's utterance was incorrect, the tutor provides the correct form. So very basic, very straightforward, explicit feedback. This is the correct form, okay? So that's one. Let's look at the next one.
Hello everybody, welcome. So did you have a good weekend? How was your weekend, Erika?
Very good, teacher. I see a great movie.
Okay, but we're talking about the weekend. It's the past. So you have to use the verb in the past, right? So what is it?
See, I saw a great movie.
Excellent, okay.
Good, all right. Should we do that one more time? Do it one more time.
Good, teacher.
Sorry, let me go back here.
Hello everybody, welcome. So, did you have a good weekend? How was your weekend, Erika?
Very good, teacher. I see a great movie.
Okay, but we're talking about the weekend. It's the past. So you have to use the verb in the past, right? So what is it?
See, I saw a great movie.
Excellent, okay.
Good, good. All right, so let's see what you guys wrote. So teacher focused on the verb only for the past. That's what Teresa said. Good. Explaining reason, Miriam. Very good. Allow the student to correct herself subtly but clearly. Good. Excellent. Excellent. Yes. Test of vocabulary. Good. Trying to get correction right. So not just explicitly pointing it out. Allow student to correct herself. Good. Excellent. Right. I want to highlight what Miriam said. Right. Explaining reason. So that's the detail that I want us to pay attention here. Right. The tutor explained the reason in addition to correcting the student. And what we call that is metalinguistic feedback. So without providing the correct form, the teacher poses questions or provides comments or information related to the formation of the student's sentence. Okay, so meaning like they gave some context, some linguistic knowledge around the mistake, right? So this, the teacher said, oh, you have to use the past tense, right? It happened before. So what is past tense, right? So in his correction, the tutor was giving some really quick grammar rules, right? To see if the student can pick up on those grammar rules and correct themselves, which the student did. So we call that metalinguistic feedback. So that's something to try out. Is sometimes you can give your student, hint at them what the rules are that they're incorrectly following or that they should be following. They might be able to correct themselves. Very good. Let's look at the next one.
So guys, talking about movies, how often do you go to the movies? Erika, how often do you go to the movies?
I go to the movies two times a month.
But remember, I go to the movies
Twice a month.
Very good.
All right. One more time.
How often do you go to the movies? Erika, how often do you go to the movies?
I go to the movies two times a month.
But remember, I go to the movies
Twice a month.
Very good.
All right, so what do we see there? Let me see if I can pull up the. Good, stop that mistake and see if students pick it up. Good, emphasis on plural. Very good. Gentle reminder, excellent. Good, good. So this form or this style, we call this elicitation, right? So the tutor directly elicits the correct form from the student by asking questions, by pausing, right? To allow the student to complete the utterance, it's A, something like that, or by asking students to reformulate the utterance, right? So say that again. So I like what Zenobia said about the gentle reminder. Okay, so this idea of eliciting, right? Trying to evoke the correct word from the student. Good. Let's move on. So for about 9 minutes, I think we'll have plenty of time to wrap this up.
So guys, talking about movies, how often do you go to the movies? Erika, how often do you go to the movies?
3.
Excuse me, three what?
3 times a month.
Okay, very interesting.
All right. So one more time.
3.
Excuse me, three what?
3 times a month.
Okay, very interesting.
All right, so what do we see there? The student said 3, right? The tutor said 3. 3 what? Ooh, focus on repetition. Good, Isabel. Using prompts to get right answer. Excellent. Request full sentence. Yeah, I like that too, Miriam. Good, right? So we call this clarification request. Okay, so by using phrases like excuse me or I don't understand, the tutor indicates that the message has not been understood or that the student's utterance contains some kind of mistake and that a repetition or reformulation is required, right? So very similar to what Isabel said here, focusing on repetition. Okay, good. All right, two more. We have two more here. Let's see how we do.
So guys, talking about movies, how often do you go to the movies? There you go. How often do you go to the movies?
Teacher, I go to the movies 2 times a month.
2 times?
Twice a month.
Ah, okay, very good.
All right, so one more time.
Times a month.
Movies.
Teacher, I go to the movies 2 times a month.
2 times?
Twice a month.
Ah, okay, very good.
All right, so this one's a little trickier. So I'll just share this one with you a little bit. So this one is repetition, right? So the tutor repeats the student's error and adjusts intonation. So that is the feature that I think is very important, is to adjust the intonation and draw students' attention to it, right? So remember that the tutor said 2 times, right? So that hints at the student to correct that. And I think this style can be combined with the finger and the gesture feedback to enhance the student's understanding of the error, right? So I would do something, if I was in this situation, I would say something like, I went to the movie, I went to the movies 2 times a month. And then I would do something like this, right? I would do something like that to let my student know, hey, you can join the 2 times together, right, into twice a month. Okay. So that's something that I think we can combine some strategies together. All right, and then last one here, let's take a look.
Hello class, welcome everybody. So, how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend, Erica?
Very good. I see a great movie.
Ah, really? You saw a great movie? What movie did you see?
I saw Zé Colmeia.
Ah, really?
Okay, good.
Erica. Hello class, welcome everybody. So, how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend, Erica?
Very good. I see a great movie.
Ah, really? You saw a great movie? What movie did you see?
I saw Zé Colmeia.
Ah, really?
Okay, so what did we see there in terms of giving feedback? Subtle way of correction, good. Examples of both tenses. Subliminal correction, which the student understood. Excellent, Isabel, good. Repeats correctly and expands statement. Very good, Don, thank you. Repetition and correction, thank you, Teresa. Yeah, so we call this form recasting. Recasting might be something that you've heard before, right? So without directly indicating that the student's utterance was incorrect, the tutor implicitly reformulates the student's error or provides the correction, right? So the tutor said, oh, you saw a great movie. What did you see? Okay. So one thing I do want to say though, and this is just a suggestion, is I recommend using this feedback style with caution, okay? Because research has shown that recasting may have detrimental effects on learning the intricacies of a language. Okay, so there's a study I remember reading in grad school where this researcher went and he stayed with a Japanese immigrant who was living in Hawaii, and this Japanese immigrant had been in Hawaii for close to 30-40 years at this point, but he still had he was still making a ton of grammar mistakes. His speaking was still not perfect. And what the researcher realized through talking to the people, friends and families of this immigrant, is that all of his support, all the people around his home, around his life, recasted instead of actually correcting his mistakes, right? So anytime he made a mistake or he said something correctly, they understood the meaning, right? They understood what the point he was getting at. And so they just continue on. And what this caused was, for over all those years that he was living in Hawaii, he actually never saw that great of not that much of a jump in his grammar knowledge, right? Because people were just recasting all the time. And he wasn't picking it up. And so I think recasting can help. It's a great technique to work into the rotation of your feedback, but I don't think it should be the core of how you give feedback. And again, sometimes this is a style we rely on the most when we are not quite comfortable with giving feedback, but it's just something to be aware of, is that if you recast too much, your student might not pick up on what it is that they are making an error on. Okay. So we have 2 minutes left, wrapped up just in time. Lori has provided me with these great links to share with you. So here are some websites for accessing online grammar practice. And so this PDF will be shared with tutors. And so you'll be able to grab these links as well as all the other information that's covered in this PowerPoint. So please, use these websites to sort of help you develop some of your content for helping your students with grammar. All right. And finally, I just want to give you my email address. So my email address is just my name, Roger Chao @oakland.edu. If you have any questions that you didn't have a chance to ask in the chat, if you want to see some specific material, please reach out. I'm always here to help. I don't teach until the later half of the summer, so I have a lot of free time on my hands. So I'm always here, and I can help. That's basically it. So I want to thank you for coming today. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, Lori, was there anything you wanted to wrap up with, Lori?
Roger, I was wondering if you could take those websites and just copy and paste them into the chat for folks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me go ahead and stop sharing real quick.
Does anybody have a quick question for Roger while he's doing that?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
If you are in a group and teaching the students, for instance, in a conversation group, and one of the ladies says a wrong sentence, so do you correct them right then, or just recast it so hopefully they'll get it, or how do you address that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zenobia. So I think, ultimately it depends on, I think, the situation, right? Is if your student is giving, clearly they're on a roll, maybe they're giving a long passage, I would maybe hold off on stopping them right at the mistake and correcting them, right? Because you don't want to break up and interrupt, right? I would let them finish and then I would correct them. But if it's just a bunch of rapid fire things, maybe they're saying one sentence, something at a time, I think you can then, instead of recasting, I think you can use some of the techniques that we covered today. But more importantly, what I like to do a lot, especially if I'm in a group or a class setting, is I like to try to bring the other students in, right? I want to see if other students can identify the error and point it out without me saying it. And this is something I do in the class, even when I teach just a regular writing class or anything, is that a student will ask me a question, right? Maybe it's about a reading or something. And before I tell them, the first thing I say is, can anyone else answer that? Right? Can anyone else say that? And I think something is, I would say is, in this situation is, I would say, if a student makes a mistake, I would say, that's a great statement, but but he or she made a little mistake here, right? Did anyone else hear that? Where was that mistake? And what this does is you're bringing the students into the activity, right? And now suddenly, even though they didn't make that mistake, they're getting to participate in practicing, right? They're practicing. And so that's my recommendation is, if they're going on if they're saying something long, maybe hold off. If it's short, you can jump right in, but more importantly, bring the students into the activity.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that
Hey,
makes
Roger.
sense.
Hey,
Phyllis
Roger.
made a point that if you want to capture those websites, what you want to do is save the chat, and down in the chat window beside where you type, you'll see a box with 3 dots in it. And if you click on that box, you'll have the option to save the chat, and all the material will be saved to your file folder, and it'll show up in a Finder window for you. All right, I want to thank everybody for giving up their lunch hour to be with Roger, and Roger for giving us some really helpful strategies. You guys, good luck using these strategies. And as always, if you get stuck, reach out to me and let me know how I can help.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, please